I finally beat Final Fantasy VI. We've been talking about it on and off for the last few weeks throughout my playthrough, checking in.
Yep.
You've been my living walkthrough.
I pretty much stopped by your desk like every morning asking you how far you were.
Mm-hmm.
And now to clarify too, you were playing it through for the first time.
Yeah.
You weren't like going back and replaying.
Yeah, it was probably like my #1 like video game blind spot. The one thing I knew going into that game was that like the world ends. Kefka destroys everything. That's the one spoiler I had.
Which is kind of a big one when you're talking about a game in an era where like RPGs are all just like, you're the hero and you're going to save the world and you're going to stop the bad guy. And you sort of start that game assuming that that's the arc that it's going to take. I mean, you essentially lose halfway through the game. Yep. Like, the bad guy wins.
You know, Kefka was clearly like the villain leading up to that point, but that really cemented his role because there's all these false hopes. You know, the Emperor was going to unite the Espers and humanity and everything. And then Kefka just puts a stop to it. And what better way to make you want to get revenge than have him destroy the world?
The other thing about that I thought was cool too is it's got the sort of Darth Vader thing going on with Kefka, right? Where it's like, he's the one who does most of the bad stuff, but he's still got a boss for that first part of the game. And I think that's part of what makes his ascension even cooler sort of halfway through. Is he's like, look, I'm done with this, I'm just going to be in charge now.
It's up to you to collect your entire party all over again for the most part, which I don't think I've done in another Final Fantasy quite to that extent.
No, and the other thing about that I thought was so awesome is it's kind of pioneering in the open world RPG sense, because Japanese RPGs up to that point usually did have a sort of directed, maybe a more linear style of story. Like the first half of the game is super linear. And then for the second half, it just sort of opens up and you're Celeste, and after you go through a very small sort of linear segment, then it's just like, all right, this destroyed world is your problem now. You've got to find your friends at your own pace.
But speaking more directly to the end of the game, you destroy Kefka, you go up to his tower and you destroy all 3 tiers of his final form. The way that they ended that game was really unique, not just for a Final Fantasy game or an RPG, but just games in general. Like, it's delivered all in like a sepia-toned post-credits type thing.
A lot of RPGs sort of have endings that sort of leave things ambiguous in some degree. If you look at something like, say, Final Fantasy VII, where it's like, okay, I guess like the life stream saves the planet or whatever. What I liked about Final Fantasy VI in particular is that it pretty much gives you resolution for all of the characters. Every character has their time in the spotlight. By the time that game is over, you just feel like there are no lingering issues that you need to resolve yet.
Yeah, I mean, it was very cool in that sort of way that, like, you know, like Mallrats ends the movie and it's just kind of like, oh, Brody went on to host a TV show and stuff like that. And it kind of gave me that kind of sense, which I really liked.
The sort of 80s montage ending where it's just like, everything turns out okay for these people.
If you really liked Gogo or Amaro, who have like very little speaking parts, or in case no speaking parts, there was something for everybody, like Celeste and Locke. What's interesting to me is you've played the game enough. If Locke isn't there but Celeste is, like, what happens there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't remember. I think what happens is, like, if you don't get Locke, instead of that scene happening, what you get instead is maybe like a pan of the Phoenix Cave or wherever where he is.
Oh, I'll give you a hint.
I think in my playthrough, I didn't get Cyan.
And that'd be a bummer not to get Cyan too, because you at one point enter Cyan's dream and kind of deal with his demons of his dead family and stuff, which is crazy.
Yeah, I definitely missed that on my first playthrough also. One of the cool things about it is that they have some little hidden things in there too. Like, for instance, how many, like, did you see any of Shadow's dreams?
I don't think I got enough of them to really piece together what Shadow's whole deal was.
Yeah, if you sleep in an inn with Shadow in your party, you'll get one of 6 dream sequences that sort of flesh out his backstory a little more before he was like Shadow the Ninja. He had some like buddy that helped him out with some robbery, and he got injured and he was stuck in the town that like Strago's from. So if you piece together those dreams, and then also the fact that like Interceptor gets along with Realm really well, and that Realm and Shadow can both equip this item called the Memento Ring. It like protects against instant death effects or something, but it says like Departed Mother's Love protects against. The game never explicitly says or like has a storyline about it, but basically like Shadow is Realm's father.
It's sort of,
and the game sort of buries, it sort of hides these clues pointing you to that fact.
You don't really get subtlety like that in games now, even about like central characters. Usually you get hit over the head with explanation.
Yeah, if there is a this character is this character's father moment, that's some like big build-up. It's not something that's just sort of buried in like item descriptions and obscure like dream sequences.
Which is really cool, because that's the way that that's one of the languages of the game that you learn. That's how you communicate with the game, is through those menus for a huge part of it. So for there to be some sort of story revelation in there, it makes sense. You spend a lot of time in there. there.
So you've played other Final Fantasy games also?
Yeah, at this point, now I just have left is 5 and 9.
Where does this one rank for you on the ones that you've played?
So I kind of have it split up between the NES and Super Nintendo era, and then PlayStation and beyond.
Yeah.
And I would definitely put 6 is at the top of the first 6 Final Fantasies, easily. That is the best, it's probably the best 16-bit RPG I've ever played. I don't know if it's my favorite Final Fantasy, it's damn close is the thing. And it's amazing how quickly that happened, because Final Fantasy VII has such a legacy for me. It was one of the first RPGs I really sunk my teeth into. But man, 6, I sit there and I try to think of a reason why it shouldn't be at the top of the list, and that's where I have a problem.
I think it's just my favorite game of all time. I mean, there's a time and place wrapped up in it also, whereas I remember renting that game on consecutive weekends, getting to the video store as soon as I could on Friday to make sure that that I got it before anyone else did, so that they wouldn't overwrite my save file.
Oh,
whatever,
nice.
Before I could, before
It's a deadly game, Joe.
Yeah. Oh, it was risky. There was one time actually where someone did erase my save file, so I had to replay the first 10 hours.
Did you go up to the register and ask them for I need their address, I need their name? Well, that's the interesting thing, is I love the game as much as I do, and I have no nostalgia for it, but you take that great game and layer on the nostalgia and the time and place to talk about, I can totally see why that game gets talked about still so much.
And the other thing that I think is interesting about it is that those 16-bit RPGs, I feel they tend to age a little bit better. In an era where we're playing all these big 3D, high production value games or something, it's a little harder to go back to the sort of rough 3D of, I would say, Final Fantasy VII, 8, 9. But when you're dealing with those 16-bit sprites, there's just something timeless about that makes it a lot easier to sort of jump back into.
I totally agree. And just little touches something surprising will happen and the character will blink really rapidly in disbelief, which is just something that you didn't see in early 16-bit RPGs. Speaking to Final Fantasy VII, I only had played Final Fantasy IV before playing Final Fantasy VII, and the leap between the SNES and the PlayStation era always seemed gigantic to me. I'm like, wow, how did you go from this stuff to Final Fantasy VII, which is so huge and epic? And 6, while it's still very much a 16-bit RPG, the way they tell the story and the way it unfolds and the twists and the character development, it makes that jump from the 16-bit to PlayStation just a little bit more reasonable.
There's some discussion online about, after Square redid Final Fantasy IV on DS, they did Final Fantasy III. There's a contingent of people out there who want to see a sort of 3D remake of 6. Where do you fall on that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's, if there was some sort of lacking element to it that felt not having 3D sprites or, a 3D environment held back the game in some way. I never felt that, ever.
Yeah, and for something like 3, I can understand it because that game hadn't been released here prior to that, so it's sort of a way to introduce this under-the-radar Final Fantasy to people. I don't see how you improve on 6 with 3D graphics.
Hopefully other people that have missed out on the game will pick it up after watching us chat about it.
When we were talking about it, I just wanted to pick it up and play it again.
Yeah.
So you never know.